Welcome to the Movie Geeks United original series, August 69, an exploration of the history you haven't heard from the most infamous crimes of the past 50 years. 10050 Cielo Drive is a notorious address in the annals of American crime, but 50 years ago, 26-year-old actress Sharon Tate had dubbed it her love house. She and her husband, director Roman Polanski, rented the French Normandy-style house starting in February 1969, shortly after music producer Terry Melcher and his girlfriend, actress Candice Bergen, moved out. High atop Benedict Canyon, the stunning property promised a sanctuary for the newly pregnant Sharon. It was also the site of many Hollywood parties, attended by everyone from marquee actors and filmmakers, random hippies, and family friends like the guest we're speaking with during this episode. Today, Dr. Don Noyes More is a chaplain at a Catholic monastery, but back in 1969, he was a wide-eyed young man barely out of teenagehood. As the youngest brother of Polanski's friend and agent, Bill Tennant, Dr. Moore was privy to these parties at Cielo, and over time, he developed an ongoing and friendly relationship with Sharon. In the morning hours of August 9th, Dr. Moore received a harrowing call from his brother, the brother who, just 15 minutes earlier, had walked through the Cielo Drive property and had positively identified the mutilated bodies of his friends, Sharon Tate, Jay Sebring, Wojtek Frykowski, and Abigail Folger.
First of all, I'd like to know about the relationship between you and your brother. It seems like you guys were on different tracks in life, perhaps. I just wanted to know about you and your brother's upbringing and your life journey up till that point.
My mother was a party woman, and during the war, my brother's my half-brother, and her husband died. He was from Texas. Then my mother met my father at a party of my grandmother's, and my grandmother and my grandfather had been in the business for a very, very long time, about 70 years altogether. And my brother and I grew up together. There's a sister, Rena, and she's still alive, but doesn't like to talk about the past at all.
Yeah.
And my brother and I grew up with a mother who was a party person. Unfortunately, she was an alcoholic. And Billy and I really clung together, you could say. Now, there was a big difference between our ages, 12 years. And I noticed as a child, he seemed to come and go. I never knew really why at the time, but he would be there sometimes and sometimes not. He would go to live with an aunt and uncle, and they were horse racing people. And his name was Zufelt, and was all about Hollywood Park and very fast people. But then Billy would come back. Billy's what I would call in my life anyway, and in our relationship, a cookie person. He was always there when I needed him. He wasn't always there, and I thrived because of him. And our lives really, in how at the later part of our lives, very different. He was out of the house by the time I was, 11, 12. My brother was bisexual, and at the time I didn't know it, but I came to find out that he was bisexual. And he met a man, Bill Belasco. You may or may not know that name. But if you don't, you should look it up. And in regards to Hollywood, he was with GMC, big agent. And he took my brother on and helped him become an actor, later an agent, and then you know the rest of his story. He did some directing. He could have lived the rest of his life for the Cleopatra Jones movie. The black exploitation movies lasted forever in regards to income. My mother committed suicide in 1963, and it was the culmination of everything that both my sister, my brother, and I witnessed. My sister was sent away to live with my grandmother very early on. So I was a very disturbed, unusual second family. But Bill and I remained very, very close, and he helped me out often.
When Bill entered the entertainment business, he obviously exposed you to some of the people that he was hanging out with and the Hollywood life and parties, didn't he?
I knew them all. Gypsy, another hanger-on in Hollywood. For that matter, later on, Sharon Tate. But the Byrds, the group The Byrds, he hung with them. I knew them all. I used to go up into Laurel Canyon. I was the only person, this is really funny, I was the only person not doing drugs. I would sit there and watch and think to myself, someday I'm going to write about this. And I have to a certain degree. But
yeah.
I've been asked many, many times over the years, especially since, about 10 years after the Manson murders and Sharon, and to interview, but my brother was alive. And I told my brother I wouldn't do any interviews while he was alive.
Do you remember when he introduced you to Sharon and Roman, what that occasion was?
Yeah, there was a supposed barbecue. There wasn't much barbecue to it. It was Sharon and Roman were having a get-together like they used to a lot. And I'd gone up to my brother's on Lime Orchard Drive in Beverly Hills, and just to visit. There's the new baby, and he had just finished playing tennis with Roman, and that's when I met Roman. And it's, by the way, Roman's a person I particularly hate. He was fond of young people. And it didn't make any difference what the sex is. And I know that may or may not, to some degree, have come out in the, I don't know, people doing his bio or not. I don't read any of that. But he also was bisexual. I don't know of any contact between him and my brother, and I doubt it very much. But who knows? Really, especially in the 60s, who knows? It was all,
right.
In Spanish, a guacamole de people. And I went down. I remember they were going down because of the little party that was going on, and I went down there and I met Sharon. And the first thing I remember about Sharon, and in my eyes, by the way, she wasn't a star. I mean, she had done some of those little movies, kind of awful movies. I mean, I don't think she ever did a good movie. But I knew who she was. I knew what she did. I was wasn't really impressed because I met mega stars. There I was impressed, but she was just like normal people. But the first thing I remember is grabbing her hand, and I remember thinking, gosh, her hand feels so frail. Why that has stuck with me all these years. But and she had a very sheepish smile. She looked, instead of looking in my eyes, she looked down. And even back then, it was sort of unusual to be shaking. It was just natural for me to reach out to her, though, because she seemed fragile. Oddly fragile. That day, I remember nothing much. People came over. That Sebring was over there, I remember. But lots of people coming and going. That was really the tenor of the times. The early 70s, the late 60s. You could go up in the Coldwater Canyon or Laurel Canyon, and if you were connected, there were the parties and the people. They were always there.
Did you get the sense from Sharon that she was out of place in that crowd?
Yes. She seemed very out of place. Now, stories and information in regards to Sharon I do read from time to time because I just really ended up loving her so much because of her vulnerability. But she never seemed comfortable. She never seemed in place. And I think it was Roman was calling the shots, though I never heard him say for her to do anything, or I never heard a cross word between them. But she was docile in certain ways and vulnerable. And I think Roman played on that.
And so how many of these times when you were around them were you in the Cielo Drive house?
Maybe 7 times.
Oh, wow.
About 7 times. It's all in the same area. If you look on the map, it's only hop, skip, and a jump, though nobody would do that in Beverly Hills, to Cielo from Lime Orchard.
I recall that Sebring's house was not too far away either.
Right.
It's right down the hill, I think. Yeah.
Neighbors, really.
Mm-hmm.
And there were real crazies at some of the parties, and they would bring, people would bring people. Oh, he's cool. There were always parties and get-togethers and sort of like dinners and going down on Sunset, going to the whiskey. I was too young for any of that. But I heard it all. I was the watcher. And the subtitle of my book is Keeper of the Story. I think that's more precise. I've been asked over and over and over again, why didn't you do drugs? I mean, that was what everyone was doing. It was because I guess I was a voyeur of life. And I didn't, and maybe even, and I'm a clinical psychologist as well, by the way, in fear of what would happen if I did take drugs, because, of course, I have that memory then of my mother.
Yeah. Well, you talked about the open parties and the fact that they weren't exclusive to the Hollywood Entertainment Group. A lot of times they'd be open, and any long-haired dreg off the street might pop in. Oh,
I saw them. That's what I was talking about. They're really sort of burnt out, psycho. I guess in a way it was the times. it was called, he's cool, it's okay, he's a little weird, but he's okay, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the real shift in social life happened after the Manson murders, and it was very distinct. And nobody was allowing anybody to any parties after that. People became extraordinarily paranoid. People in Beverly Hills, in fact, were buying old cars so they didn't have to drive in public with new cars. My sister Sandra lost most of her hair. My brother and Sandy divorced. Believe it or not, the day after the murders, my brother and sister-in-law got phone calls, and I doubt very much it was from Manson, but saying, "You're next," that sort of things. So the emotional impact on my family and the impact in Beverly Hills and, if you will, the West Side, as it was defined then, the party scenes changed. Just, in fact, even very much so like the politics of the day. Things changed very dramatically. And it wasn't Altamont that changed it. It was Manson. It was palpable. It was, you could taste it. People looked at you funny. People that would call and say, "Why don't you come over to dinner?" or "We're going to head to that." It stopped. And my brother was profoundly emotionally damaged because, as you know, he identified the body, and he called me after that, not too long after that, and he was profoundly hysterical, sobbing on the phone. They butchered her. He said something that was interesting that has always stayed with me, but is non-factual. He said, and it was distinct, and I responded to it, that the baby had been cut out of her.
I mean, it doesn't appear to be so from all the medical examiner reports and the photos at the scene and that sort of thing. But I mean, I would imagine the scene looks so horrible that your mind could go to that place and that trauma.
And remember, Bill had a young baby also. Sandy was supposed to be there that night. But the baby, the real story is the baby got chicken pox. And she thought the baby was sick and didn't want to go down and didn't want to leave her with anyone, so Sandy stayed there and didn't go down the hill. Lucky her.
Do you have a memory of the last time you saw Sharon? Was she pregnant when you last saw her? Or?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. And she said, if I cry over this, oh, gee. She sat there, and we were sitting on a wicker love seat, and I had seen her pregnant already, so it wasn't a surprise. And she said, "Oh, I'm really looking forward to this and being normal." She said, and I'm paraphrasing her, but she said, "All I want is to be normal." And I was thinking to myself, gee, how much normal does it get? You've got money, you're an actress, but that's the last I remember.
Do you have memories of Sebring and Wojtek and Abigail?
I've seen all of them. And I was not contemporary to any of them. So I was just like so much, you know.
Yeah.
I was a kid. I wasn't hip, slick, and cool. I was the kid sitting there and watching. And it probably unnerved some people.
In your story that I read, your article that I read, you wrote about an argument where someone was kicked out of the house, and which was during one of these parties, which was interesting to me because there's an anecdote that the police were trying to follow up on, where they thought there was a drug connection, an argument that ensued in the house, and they were kicked out. And I think that was a lead that they were following up on to see if it was possible revenge for being kicked out of the party. But is that the same incident, do you think?
Well, that's interesting. I don't know, but I would venture to guess there's good reason to believe that. It was a disruptor. It was I guess today you would call him a street person, but a lot of people that were hippie-ish, if you will, long hair and not necessarily always kept, but cool, could see whatever the scene was. But I don't know why the disturbance or exactly what the disturbance was about it, except that it was made to seem he was causing a problem with somebody, and he got kicked out, and he was yelling all the way out. So I don't know. But it was very distinct, and I thought it's odd when I look back now, but I thought at the time I wouldn't want some of these people mad at me. Yeah. If you want to know the absolute truth about the drugs, it was flowing freely. There was cocaine, of course, but mainly marijuana, acid, some speed, but not much. I never knew anybody or any situation where people were taking heroin. I don't think it hit that industry yet. But there was a lot of cocaine use, and it just got worse in the 70s, of course. And but there are people doing lines on tables, and never saw Sharon do any drugs. I saw Roman do drugs. I saw him share a joint with my brother, but I don't consider that really a drug as such, especially not these days. So I don't know about his drug use, but I know there was a lot that was available, and it was always offered to me.
Did you first hear about the murders from TV or from your brother?
I woke up in the morning. I remember the day absolutely clearly, and I turned on, and I didn't usually do this, but for some reason I turned on the TV while I was making breakfast. And I saw my brother going through the gate, and I said, that looks like Sharon's house. And then the narrative came, and I found out. My brother called me maybe half an hour after that. And he was, like I said, he was just completely hysterical. He had never seen anything like that. Of course, I can't imagine anyone seeing anything like that. But, and I saw him and Sandy about 2 weeks after, and they were still just shells of people. Low affect, would look away. Even Sandy's involvement with the baby, Courtney, seemed oddly distant.
One of the most infamous writings about it, and I'm sure you've probably heard it over the years, was from Joan Didion, who said that she felt that the 60s essentially ended that day, but then in the same sentence she also said that very, very few of that circle were surprised.
Very insightful. No, I hadn't read that. I totally agree. And it reminds me of 1979, being in a gay bar called the Cabaret in San Francisco. Big dance place. It was the West Coast San Francisco equivalent of 54. And I was bringing a friend from Los Angeles out so he could go to a gay club. He was gay. And it was night before New Year's, and went up. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and he said, at the people, there were maybe a third of the people that were there. A lot of people were very shallow-cheeked. It felt very different and actually very wrong. And he said, I wonder how long this can keep going. Flashback. I thought similar things as how long can you have drug parties and people coming and sex with underage minors and a lot of other stuff that was going on. And just thinking something bad could happen. And it did.
Yeah. Did you or your brother, to your knowledge, for that matter, buy into the helter-skelter theory? Did that seem plausible?
My brother, after the event, would never speak of it. He went dark. And that's another story in and of itself. He never mentioned it after. When I brought it up, maybe a couple of weeks or so after the murders, these are people that shut down, and I wasn't going to revisit that, and especially after my brother's problems in the 80s. So.
Well, I have to ask, did any of those, when they actually arrested the people responsible, none of those people look familiar to you, or did they?
I was on Sunset Boulevard a lot, like with a lot of kids. A lot of people looked familiar, but you didn't know them. You'd see them around. Watson, I know I saw. But the rest of them, if you look at the pictures at the time, they look like so many young girls and guys that were hanging around Sunset Boulevard and Hollywood Boulevard. It was a very typical look.
Yeah. And there were reports that Watson had been at the Cielo house before. Is that where you think you saw him?
No. I think I saw him on Sunset outside of the Sea Witch. And he was with some people that I knew. And I'm sure it was him. I've never said I'm absolutely sure, because how could I be absolutely sure? But I'm as sure as I need to be for me.
How old were you at this point? Were you just in your 20s, or?
Right, I just had turned 20 by then.
Wow, yeah. That's an unbelievable environment for.
I know.
I think when I was 19 or 20, I don't have that life experience.
I'm slowly, because of friends and people that have known me, getting some of the story, and I publish it through Downtown LA Life magazine. Some of these stories are coming out slowly. I've wanted to wait until everybody was dead, but now I'm beginning to fear I'll be dead before I can get the stories out. So go to downtownlalife.com. Downtown LA Life, LIFE.com. They're stories of what was actually happening in Hollywood. My grandmother, for instance, was one of the stand-ins for Jean Harlow.
Wow.
We've been in this business a real long time, and one of my favorite things to do was to go to my grandmother's in Hancock Park and go to her cedar chest, and she had all of the big stars, and we would go out to Chasen's and that, and I would meet people also. So it didn't start with my brother. My brother didn't need any family help. He knew how to get the help.
Well, you gave me so much that I was looking for. I wanted to get a feeling, especially for Sharon and your brother, and just the feeling of living in that time period, and you gave me all of that. So I thank you so much, sir. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
On the next episode of August 69,
right across the street is like 9 members of the family with the swastikas carved in their foreheads.
he was the last known visitor to Sharon Tate's Cielo Drive residence prior to the victims or the killers. His testimony during the Manson trial helped the prosecution establish a timeline that proved essential in achieving convictions. In his first ever interview about these events, we speak with Dennis Hurst, the bicycle delivery boy who entered the Cielo Drive property only hours before the murderers arrived.
And a gentleman answered the door. I found out later it was Jay Sebring.
While narrowly escaping his own potential threat from the killers.
God, I remember that. It kind of haunts me.
Tune in to the next episode of our August 69 series. Visit MovieGeeksUnited.net for more details.